I'll do okay. All right, we are going to be talking about press clippings and how to do press clippings and the reason for them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen so that we can review this together. So here is my document on how to do a press clipping. So I thought that I can go through this and explain it. So how PR works is that we as PR practitioners, we submit news to the media, whether we send it as a news release or a media alert or a calendar listing, or we just pitch an idea for a story or any kind of correspondence that we have with the news media. And we also usually send it along with photos or images to accompany a story. So if the news is deemed worthy enough that what we're sending out, then the news media prints or publishes the information that we send.
Yes.
We love it when they print it word for word. We wrote, because then we know that we created it in a way that is for their use. But they can also do their own interview. They can also do their own writing, and it will appear that way. Internally, when we are successful in placing a story in our article, we call that a hit. Oh, we got a hit in the Providence Journal, or we got a hit in ABC6, whatever it is. So we collect these hits or these press clippings into a notebook, and they can either be a hard copy or they can be an electronic folder. And the whole reason that we do it is to prove what we have done as a PR firm. We want to show the client what they got in terms of their communication in the news media. Sometimes we need it to impress a prospect, because someone might say to us, well, what have you done in my industry? So how does a public relations firm showcase what they do? It's based on your news clippings. So the more volume of news clippings that you have, it seems to go along with how successful you are as a public relations firm. But now that the news media nowadays, because the news media is really not as prolific as it once was in terms of having all these newspapers that are thriving and publishing, there's a lot less news media these days. So having a lot of clippings is not necessarily the quantity, it's more about quality. So right now it's more quality versus quantity. But when it comes to press clippings, it still seems to be the kind of thing that clients need. They would love to see what results and hits that we were able to achieve for them, working with them. So it's helpful if you think about a clipping notebook as either an archive or what I would call a scrapbook. Right? So
yeah, that's what it reminded me of when I was looking through them yesterday.
Yes, it's like a scrapbook, right? So how we process a PR clipping for archiving or scrapbook, whatever it is. The end goal of a PR clipping is to document the name of the media outlet or the publication that it appeared in, the date that the clipping was printed, or if it was sent out like an email, or if it aired somewhere. And when I say sent out as an email, what I mean is some of the news magazines and newspapers and news media outlets have regular email newsletters that they send out. For example, I subscribe to Providence Business News, who has 5 or 6 different topics of e-newsletters that they send out. Could be healthcare, there's one on nonprofits, there's one on technology, and that sort of thing. So that's why I say the date the clipping was emailed. That could have been an email newsletter that went out. And also what's really helpful to see is the placement of the clipping on the page, because it could be a front page story or it could be a tiny little blurb. And if you only saw that tiny little blurb on a piece of paper, you may not fully get like the context of where it appeared. Okay. So an example would be, here's an example of a newspaper.
Yes.
And if we were just taking this little tiny blurb up here that had to do with a client and you placed it on the paper, on a piece of paper, like a scrapbook, like you were cutting it out and gluing it, you
Right.
might not know that it actually appeared up at the top of the page, right? Or if it's on this page, you wouldn't know that it was under events and activities, you know,
Right.
because you would have just cut this out
Mm-hmm.
and then you don't show anything, right? So we want to
Mhm.
always show as much as we can the placement of the clipping on the page itself,
Okay.
right? Now, we always say the more clippings, the merrier. But now we do know it's more about quality versus quantity. However, there are some newspapers around here, such as the East Bay newspapers, that has multiple newspapers within the overall company. So for example,
Right.
it's East Bay newspapers, but within it is the Bristol Phoenix and the Warren Times Gazette and the East Providence Post. And they tend to look the same the way they're laid out. And
Right.
if an article ran in all of those, it still counts as, if it ran in all 7, it still counts as 7 different clippings.
Okay.
So you might look at something and say, I already clipped this. And it looks very similar to, the East Providence Post looks very similar to the Warren Times Gazette. But guess what? It's 2 different newspapers. So
Right.
you want to clip them out same differently. What we do is we take an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and we actually cut out the newspaper article that appeared, and we put it on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and we make a scrapbook sort of compilation of what that clipping is. Why do we do it on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper? Well, because if a client said, hey, I need my press clippings, can you get me copies of them? You go to your copy machine and you just put these 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper in there, and
Yeah.
it's great, right?
However, there was something that I wanted to ask you, but you were already gone when I had thought of the question. How would you go about scanning clippings that don't fit into the scanning?
I'm going to tell you that. I'll
Okay.
tell you that now.
Right.
In a minute. So the reason that we do it on 8.5 by 11 is because it is much easier to scan. It's much
Right.
easier to copy. And
Mm-hmm.
it's much easier to organize it in a 3-ring binder that way, instead of trying to put something really big onto a scanner, or, that sort of thing.
Right.
So we'll just go into pointers first, and then I'll talk about how to create a clipping
Okay.
of all different sizes.
Okay.
So some of the pointers are, before you cut up a news article, it's really important to determine if there's anything on the other side that's important.
Right. Yeah.
So let's say we really wanted this particular blurb, but on the back, there was something that, right, if you cut that, you would ruin this side.
Right.
So the first thing that you have to do is figure out, well, which side do I want to make a Xerox copy of? Or sometimes we get 2 copies of the publication, just because I might get one at home and I also get my one at the office. So
Right.
you might want to find out if we have an extra copy of it first, so that you can go take the real thing. So in any
Yeah.
case, you always want to take the real actual thing.
Okay.
All right. So again, you don't want to ruin it by cutting it. So it could be the continuation of the story or whatever. So make a Xerox of whatever side you decide first. And then keep in mind that when you make we like to take the original, because if you are doing a Xerox, then if it's going to be too dark, or it comes out not looking so good because you didn't put it on the light contrast setting
Okay.
of the copy machine, you want
Mm-hmm.
it to be able to be copied,
Okay.
right? So that's the other thing that you want to keep in mind, is that this needs to be replicated, and it might be replicated numerous times. So that's why we always want the original whenever possible. And we want to make sure that it's not going to be too light or too dark, so it will not replicate well.
Okay.
And then you decide first if cutting up the article will diminish its ability to impress. So for example, if it's a lead article, I don't care if it's little, but you don't want to cut it out and then miss out by showing that was up at the top,
Right.
And so maybe it's better to just take this whole piece of paper out and put this on the page,
Okay.
instead of cutting out this little thing and making it be, an island in the middle of this page
Right.
that has no context.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, here's an example of a large one. This is a newspaper tabloid section. It's not 8.5 by 11 at all.
Right.
And I'm only showing you this because it could even be going this way, which is like a regular newspaper, right, size.
Right.
But this one happens to be this way. And when you go to this, here is the whole entire spread is our client. The whole entire spread.
Wow.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't want to cut this up,
No.
right? If you cut it up, you're going to ruin
Exactly.
what it's going to look like. And you don't want to cut that up either, you know?
Mm-hmm.
This one happens to be an advertorial, meaning we paid for this to go in. So it wasn't necessarily true PR because it's more advertising mixed with PR. However, we wrote the whole thing. This is written, it is a newspaper. It's written to be like a newspaper article. And this is great publicity
Mm-hmm.
for the client. So we don't want to wreck that. There's a couple of ways that you would handle this. If you have to make this on an 8.5 by 11 and cut it up, then you would actually probably take half of it, cut it where it would make sense.
Okay.
Don't cut it in the middle of the picture, right? You would cut it where it would make sense. Ooh, thundering out. And then you would put that on one page because that would fit, right? 8.5 by 11 this way. And then you might want to take the bottom part and put it as an 8.5 by 11.
Okay.
So you're actually going to use 2 pieces of paper
Okay.
for this clipping.
Okay.
All right. And what the main thing that you would want to do is simply to cut it out of the page itself and put it into a plastic sleeve. So if somebody really wanted it to see it, they would have to actually take it out and see the original. But that if they needed to make a Xerox or a scan of it, it would be on an 8.5 by 11, on 2 pages of an 8.5 by 11.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, in the old days, what we used to do is we used to retype it all
Oh my
and then
God.
create our own type of clipping using these photos and make it be 8.5 by 11 in size.
It's kind of cool though.
Yeah. So that is also an option whenever you have to do that, except it wouldn't be an original, but it would
Right.
show what it looked like.
Okay.
All right. So when you cut it, you'd make sure that you would cut it. I know you kind of really can't see it, but along,
Yeah.
you were cutting here, you would make sure you cut exactly so you don't cut that paragraph off.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next page would start with, it would be continued. So it would be a 2-page
Right.
type of a clipping.
Okay.
So let's go back into how to create a clipping. There are various types of PR hits that we need to archive. It could be a news story or an article. It could be a calendar listing, which just is, something that appears in a list of events and happenings of things to do. What's tricky is a broadcast interview because there's no way to put on paper what you heard on the radio. There's no way to put on paper what you saw on TV or listened to on a podcast. So how do you think that you could possibly do a radio interview clipping? Let's just say that our client got interviewed on the radio and it lasted about a minute or less, or on television. How do you think that you could do a clipping on paper?
My guess would be to go back and type it up. Maybe type up like their interview little by little.
Yes, that's very good. A transcript of what they said, a transcript of the interview. So when you're doing that, how do you think that you could put it onto an 8.5 by 11? Well, what else would you need? What else would you need to go along with it?
Where it aired.
Yep.
And the date it aired.
Yes.
And maybe, do they have to have pictures?
They don't have to have pictures. Well, what could you use for an image that goes along with a television interview?
I'm not sure.
Think about what you would see on TV when you're watching the interview. Then you're watching it on your computer, right? Because you went the next day, you checked out ABC 6 and you saw the segment that aired. what could go along with the transcript on your page?
Um, I'm not sure.
You would take a screenshot of the image of the client on TV being interviewed.
Okay.
So you would take what we're calling a screenshot, which is just pick one of the frames of the actual segment that's on television,
Okay.
and then obviously try to get one where it has the client, maybe with their name at the bottom, how they were identified at the bottom of the screen, and also if they were interviewed by a host or a reporter, is it within the studio? Is it not in the studio? Is a person sitting across from them at a desk? So maybe you can have a few different photos from
Okay.
the actual interview itself to show what ran
Okay.
visually on a piece of paper without a person having to click the link that you would also provide to get to that. So
Right.
a lot of these live online. So when you have an ABC6 segment that ran on TV and then you go to the website, you would actually, that would live there and you could find it online. So there's a link to the actual video,
Okay.
and you would want to include that on this piece of paper. So a client wanted to go check it out and got this link, got this piece of paper, they would have a lot of information as to anything about that broadcast interview that you could put on there. I would probably put how long it lasted. I would probably put when it appeared in the segment, in the television broadcast itself. So was it 3 minutes in? Was it 28 minutes in? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that tells me if it was in the beginning as a top news item or if it was later on as a more of a feature story. I would put who interviewed the client. I would probably put a little summary of what it was about, or at least a title, you know?
Yeah.
Anything that you can put on there, you're trying to prove that you got that client that television segment. So
Okay.
what would you like to put in there? So that's how you would do that clipping. Also
Okay.
for radio or for a podcast.
Right.
We talked about e-newsletter mentions. That's another type of a PR hit that I talked about earlier. And then there's this thing called a media mention or blurb. This could be as simple as a client quote that is included in another article or a story. It could be a very short blurby piece that runs on the front page of the paper that says like more inside, turn to page 3.
Mm,
You know?
right. Mm-hmm.
And it could even be if you open up a magazine, it could be a little blurb within the table of contents, sometimes even with a photo. Sometimes tables of contents have photos on them, and it will say, story about Anna Myers. She's going to be featured on page 38. So you don't want to lose out on that clipping either,
Right. Yeah.
because it appeared on the front cover, then you open it up and there it was in the table of contents, and then you went to page 38 and then there's the big story. So all
Okay.
of that together constitutes a clipping. And you don't want to forget about all the other ways that the newspaper or the news media outlet is driving a visitor or a reader to that.
Okay.
All right.
Mhm.
So for print, basically you cut out the article of the printed publication along with the name of the publication, the section of the article it was printed in. Now this
Mhm.
means, like on this one, it's up at the top, The Reporter, June 2020. But this is just as important because it's the name of the section that the article was printed in, events
Right.
and activities.
Okay.
So you don't want to just, like I said, cut that out and have no context
Right.
where that's in.
Mm-hmm.
The date of publication, okay, we got it. This is a monthly, June. You could even print this, to cut this out, it says 20, page 20.
Okay.
I mean, if it was down here, like say it was this blurb that we wanted, you still want to cut this out.
Right. Okay.
Probably just want to take this whole piece of paper and put this on. Why not?
Yeah.
Why not? I would probably cut the ads out,
Right.
right? But I
Okay.
would put everything within context, and so we would see how it was appeared on the page.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like I mentioned, cut out any other companion blurbs, like if it was mentioned in the table of contents, or if there was teaser copy on the front cover, if there was any photos or any captions that go along with it. All of that is part of a clipping. Now you cut it out, but the first thing that you should do is to arrange it on your piece of 8.5 by 11 blank paper. And that's because you want to make sure that you are leaving room on the left-hand side for a 3-hole punch. So the left margin should be larger than the right margin.
Yeah.
And you want to make sure that everything is laying out looking good.
Okay.
What I have done, if I was to cut this out, and I cut these ads out, and I've got all this blank space on the page now, I might go to the front cover of the Reporter and cut out the words, the Reporter, and paste it over here sideways, because I'm making like a scrapbook page, right? So if it was the Providence Journal or whatever, if it was this one, Proud to be East Bay, a supplement to East Bay newspapers, I might cut this out. And if I could put that on a page, I would, with a supplement to East Bay newspapers. I'd cut that out, say, if I was doing it without cutting this page out entirely, right? That's something that's very helpful to show everything that you can about that particular book. So you arrange it without gluing it on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. And then you can decide, do I need 2 sheets, or is this okay to fit on 1 sheet? So you fit as much as you can on an 8.5 by 11 sheet. And then you take the glue stick out, and you affix it to your 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. So you arrange it all on the page first, so you know how it's going to lay out. And that way, if you have any questions at all, you can put all of that under a paper clip, attach it to a white paper, and hand it to me and say, Betty, is this looking good? You can actually show it to someone in the office here to get a second opinion if you need it.
Okay.
I would suggest, though, that you do not cut anything out until you really know.
Right.
Because you might have just ruined something, right?
Yeah, I don't want to do that.
I might have said, oh, no, you cut the Proud to be East Bay out. Well, you cut out the client's boat. Like, how do you know that that's not the client's boat, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Might not know. And then you just ruin that the only one copy that we have, you know?
Yeah.
So always ask a question before you cut something.
Okay.
All right?
Yep.
The other thing to do, I know it's not on this list, but I just made it this today. See this one? This one has a whole bunch of writing on it. Like, I did this. I circled this whole thing. I circled this with a pen. I wrote something over here, like I forgot. You know, I wrote on this with pen. If this were a clipping, I just ruined it. You never want to write on a clipping with anything unless you know what you're doing with it. Because I just ruined this clipping completely by circling things and, you know, checking things off like that, see? So yeah, don't do that. So don't ever write on anything. You can always take a Post-it note, put it on it, and ask a question, right? In case you didn't know which one of these was a clipping for a client, which paragraph. Don't write on it and say, Betty, which one is this? And then you just ruined it.
Right.
Right? So you don't want to do that. You always want to use a Post-it note, maybe write in pencil, but that could even ruin it in some way.
Yeah.
Right? All right, so you arrange everything. We talked about that. Using glue stick, check that you have a clipping that is complete with everything from step 1, the name of the publication, the name of the section that the article is printed in, the date of publication, and anything else that goes along with it. And then I say that because it sometimes is easy when you're doing clippings to forget that you need the date and you know, you might throw the rest of that away of what you don't need. And if it went into Einstein's cage as a filler and he soiled it, then we would lose that one forever. So we don't want that. Then when you're done, you just place that paper, you 3-hole punch it, and you put it into the 3-ring binder.
Got it.
I prefer that not a lot of clippings use the plastic. I only want to use the plastic sleeves.
Big ones.
What?
For the big ones?
For the big ones. Because then when you want to quickly go to it, you don't want to keep taking this out of plastic.
Right.
I want to be able to see it really quickly and just thumb through the clippings. So that's okay to have that.
Okay.
When you do put a clipping in a binder, the most recent should be first.
Okay.
When you open up the binder, it's all the most recent clippings in date order. Again, for broadcast, again, any pre-broadcast promotion that you can find online or maybe something on email, create a clipping from anything else that you can have with that.
Okay.
And then, like I see, it says here, after a podcast or a radio or a TV video, if anything's online, print a screenshot or another capture of it, and you can handwrite or type onto the page key information about it, such as, but not limited to, the segment length, the topic or the title, the guest name, the interviewer name, the date it ran. Also, sometimes there are comments from the public as part of the airing. So you might have to wait until the bulk of those comments are online and then print a hard copy to archive those.
Okay.
Could be pages and pages of it. If they are too numerous for printing, you can save them as a PDF, or you can screenshot the document electronically and then note on the hard copy printout that these are located in blah, blah, blah client folder to direct the person as to where to find those things that you saved.
Okay.
All right.
Yep.
Do you know how to screenshot on a Mac?
Yep, I just did it.
And do a clip? Oh, all right. So it's Shift Command 4, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And then you just
Mm-hmm.
go like that, and then after
Goes
you
to
let
the desktop.
go, it becomes a screenshot.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So that is pretty much how to do a clipping. I'm going to stop sharing right now. But do you have any other questions related to clippings that might have come up as you were doing them?
Yeah, well, actually, before I forget to tell you, I called Marlene and I just
This is being recorded, so we're trying not to talk about any
okay,
clients.
okay.
You can save that question. I'm just talking about screenshots and then clippings, and then I'll
Okay.
cancel.
I don't believe so.